chick flicks, romantic comedies, rom-coms. You love them, you hate them, but we are here to eviscerate them. Welcome to the RomCom Killjoys podcast. I'm your host, Jonelle Walker. Now, let's get on with some feminist joy killing. All right, welcome back everybody to the show. Today we are covering another rom-com from the golden age, one might say, of the romantic comedy, the 2008-2009 film season. And here to discuss this prime example of this prime time of the rom-com is the incomparable Alice Lee. Alice, will you introduce yourself to the people?
You know, after this kind of 2 weeks of quarantine we've had, I have no idea who I am anymore. I have a cat and I look at other people's dogs out the window. That's pretty much my life and my personality now. Otherwise, I am a graduate student and I have no qualifications whatsoever to be talking about romance.
But this is why you're going to have so many important and valuable things to say about this movie, which also is not qualified to talk about romance.
And luckily, it doesn't.
It does not, which let's get into it. The film in question is Bride Wars, made in the year of our Lord 2009. And here's our summary. Since the time they were little girls, best friends Liv, played by Kate Hudson, and Emma, played by Anne Hathaway, have been planning every aspect of their future weddings, including choosing the same destination, New York's famed Plaza Hotel. But when a clerical error causes a clash in wedding dates, Liv and Kate discover their inner demons, with their lifelong friendship as a possible casualty. All right, Alice, so this is what Google says this movie is about. But what is this movie really about?
Okay, so Anne Hathaway in her, kind of peak pre-Oscar, look at me taking the saddest, most put-upon roles imaginable, plays this, kind of comically unselfish teacher, and her best friend is Kate Hudson, who plays basically, extruded big law byproduct, and they want to get married to each other. But they can't. They're stuck with these sort of non-entities of boyfriends. And the entire movie is about their externalized desire to actually get married to each other while dealing with the fact that they in fact have to get married to men.
Yep, that is it. I would say that this is a great example of what I'm going to invent is the homoromantic comedy. The homo rom-com. There is even a scene at the start of this movie where the two of them actually get married as children.
And Emma is like, can I be the bride next time, right?
Yes, and Liv says, I always play the bride. Heteronormativity, Alice.
But then that's foreshadowing because at the end of the movie, they both get to play the bride because they're both in wedding dresses.
That's so true. So in some ways, you could say that the end of the movie is queering itself on purpose or accident. I can't tell. How aware is this movie of its own homoromantic subtext, do you think, Alice?
I mean, they literally walk down the aisle together in their own wedding dresses. When you're watching the movie, right, there's this logical reaction you want to say, which is just get married at the same time, just have the same wedding. This is the logical step out of the scenario. And the fact that the movie had to make this kind of convoluted plot happen with Chris Pratt being a controlling misogynist, which let's get into that later. I think it's just I don't know how self-aware this movie is. I think my money is on very self-aware.
I actually at points wondered if there was a more explicitly queer version of this script floating around, and then they sort of inserted these heteronormative moves to keep it on the up and up for a mainstream film in 2008. Because the plot line, for listeners who haven't seen the movie,
Anne Hathaway and Kate Hudson are both marrying different guys, even though they should be marrying each other, as we have established. But in the end, Anne Hathaway leaves her fiance Chris Pratt at the altar to get with Kate Hudson's brother. So she does in some way marry into Kate Hudson's family, which is a whole thing. But at any rate, it's a very shoehorned in plot. And it's an example, I think, of how men in a movie in general are not as much characters as they are sort of light switches in a sense. Like, they're props at best.
Yeah, I mean, like, if you ignore what actually happens in the plot, here's the relationship between Liv and Emma. Liv buys Emma Dolce & Gabbana. Emma sends Liv sweets and chocolates to her office. They go to a wedding planner together. They have a wedding on the same date. They get up on stage at a male strip club together and dance sexily. This is very much a gay movie. It's a very gay movie. It's a gay movie between the two types of women, which is blonde and domineering and brunette and nice, I guess.
Yeah, there's a whole thread where they're so insistent on Liv being very aggressive and then Emma being the more like submissive, nice one.
Yeah, so it's really about like a sub kind of asserting herself as like a verse or a top. I just thought of something else. There's a scene where Liv says, "I feel so alone," and her male fiance, who I actually quite liked. I thought he was nice, and his fragment of a personality was a good fragment. He says, "I'm right here," and then Liv just doesn't respond to that. She doesn't say anything. And it's like, oh my God, throw the man a bone. You're marrying him.
Right. And even earlier in the film, the way that Liv finds out that she's engaged or about to be engaged is that she and Emma find the ring together and open the ring box together and then go out to celebrate the engagement together without her fiance, whose name I can't even remember, being involved at all. So in some sense, they get engaged even in the movie and have like a small engagement party. It's so sapphic.
It truly is.
There's even that scene, I think my favorite is that, and speaking of, Emma is kind of a sub gone rogue into domination. When Emma's character busts into Liv's wedding and like pounces on her on the aisle, they roll around together on the aisle. And then there's this amazing shot at the end of it where they pull apart from each other and they're laying next to each other in their wedding dresses on the aisle as if they're in this like post-coital moment. It's a lot.
Yeah, their hair is all tousled. There's rose petals from Liv's bouquet scattered all around. Their dresses are ripped. It's like it is that scene in a heterosexual rom-com where like the guy and the girl like kind of flop back onto the pillows together. I've always wondered about that scene because what kind of sex are you having exactly?
Where you flop?
Yes, but like you need, your parts to touch in a certain configuration of your choice, of course. So unless you're like sitting next to each other and you're like reaching across each other and giving each other like hand jobs, I guess that's what they've all been doing in every single movie.
I feel like it's one of two things. It's either that or it's that the film wants them to be so chaste that they're just like standing in like a Jane Austen country dance form where they're just like touching hands as they sit up. And then once they take their hands away from each other, they flop back in ecstasy. I don't know which is worse. They both sound pretty bad.
I could be really down for some sexless Regency dancing in bed. That sounds hot.
So one big question I have with this movie, Alice, is that on the one hand, we have this obviously like sapphic girlfriends who are girlfriends text going on. But we also have this like wedding industrial complex criticism, I would say. So I wonder, what do those two things have in common? Like, why are they tangled up in this movie?
That is so wild because I was loving all of the wedding industrial complex. I mean, whoever did the flowers for this movie should be fucking fired. Peonies and calla lilies together? Are you blind? Are you an idiot? Whoever put those antique lavender roses together for Liv's bouquet, like, what? If florists had licenses, they should have their license revoked. When we think about when the movie was actually released, it was in sort of this, like, nebulous time for gay marriage, where the thing that people were fighting for was the right to buy into that bullshit marriage industrial complex, which again begs the question of how self-aware was this movie? Was it a like queer rights now, like all ladies deserve to get married to other ladies in big white dresses and lots of flowers, or is it actually like weddings suck and women shouldn't buy into this if they're straight?
Right, because in a way, if we think of this movie really being a rom-com because it's about the strife between Liv and Emma, and then ultimately they overcome that strife to end up together, the thing that keeps them apart is the wedding industrial complex. That's the thing they fight about.
Yeah, like all of these dreams that women as little girls have been trained to want and desire for their entire lives. But at the same time, the movie is narrated by the wedding planner. Can we talk about how weird that is?
Yes!
Because she doesn't otherwise play a role in the movie.
And she seems like, as you say about the flowers, like not the most competent, actually. There are moments where she seems a little bit, they even refer to her as a weird woman, I think, at some point.
Well, she is a weird woman.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why is she narrating the story of their lives? Like, when she doesn't actually, like, play any role in the movie, in the plot. Even it kind of seems in the wedding. It'd be one thing if she was like playing a fairy godmother type role in the movie where she was actually like trying to get them to see reason and like get together.
Oh, but see, maybe that's the earlier version of this script that was a lot more explicitly gay. Like, maybe there was a version where she, like, booked their weddings on the same day on purpose as their, like, lesbian fairy godmother to be like, listen, I already can see that you don't want to marry these guys, you want to marry each other, so let me just start some rom-com hijinks to get you together. And then maybe in the end, her whole, like, you know, voiceover speech where she talks about, in the end, sometimes the person that you end up with is not your spouse, but your best friend, was initially a little bit more
textual rather than subtextual.
Yes.
This movie did have some great lines, though. I died laughing at "you have been dead until now" because that's just so on the nose.
Right. Marion St. Clair, the wedding planner, says, your wedding is the first day of the rest of your life. You have been dead until now. My assistant will always be dead.
Liv had this line, which was like, what do boys learn in school? When she was talking about her Vera Wang dress.
Yeah, there was so much weird, I have to say that there was so much weird fat shaming in this movie, including the refrain of, you don't alter Vera to fit you, you alter yourself to fit Vera.
Like, that is not true.
Not at all. Also, it's kind of an insult to Vera Wang. She's an amazing tailor.
She really is. And, no, like, that's just wrong. Also, that dress was ugly.
Yeah, it was...
Sorry, go on.
No, it's true. There was actually a lot of sort of hideous 2008, 2009 era fashions on display in this here film. Although I will say that I was amused by the fact that at one point, one of the wacky hijinks that happens in this titular bride war is that Emma dyes Liv's hair blue. But when it comes out, I actually was like, hey, in 2020, that'd be dope. That'd be like a strong look, like a blonde with a bunch of like blue streaks.
That's another sapphic thing that Emma did for Liv. She dyed her hair a funky color.
Yes.
If you just strip this movie down to its separate parts, it's a very gay movie. But then somehow you like puzzle boxed it back together into like a heterosexual, like normative sort of shell. Mm-hmm. But like the parts are still like extremely critical in a weird way of heterosexual marriage. Like that girl who got divorced for the third time randomly. Mm-hmm. It's just like a random subplot that appeared in the movie. There was this entire storyline about how Chris Pratt turned out to be a jerk because, you know, studies do show that when a man and a woman get married, that is one of the big triggers for the man to become abusive because that's a big life change. And like, that's when a lot of abusive behaviors begin.
Yeah, let's talk about that more. I know you were interested in talking about Chris Pratt's like transition to that state in the film. And it is sort of, on some level, it starts to come out of nowhere, but I think your point is well made that sometimes it does. I mean, I think our first trigger for it is that at one point he says something about Kate Hudson's fiance not being able to control his wife.
And that was treated as a red flag in the movie, which was pleased about.
Yeah, the movie, I think, in general, is pretty critical of heterosexual dating norms and courtship norms and marriage norms, which is really intriguing, right? Like the single girlfriends of Emma and Liv are miserable. They have a hard time getting with someone. They're a little bit stereotypical in their despair, but they seem to sort of express this like non-happiness with heterosexual dating. And then their friend who gets married at the beginning of the film, by the end of the film, is getting divorced.
See, the person who is married ends the film by getting divorced. The person who is engaged ends the film by tackling her best friend and then leaving her fiancé at the altar. And then there's only really one happily married couple at the end of the movie. And I mean, the man there is just such a non-entity. Mm-hmm. He is only there to be supportive.
Indeed, I think like at the beginning of the film when we first meet the fiancés, I actually wrote in my notes, these are the same man. They have the same haircut. They're wearing the same suit, which I have to believe was intentional, but it's eerie. It's hilarious how much these characters are inconsequential, and I wonder how much the film was on top of that and aware of it.
And it is weird to me that which one they picked to become a controlling misogynist and which one they picked to be a supportive fiancé. I think it is striking to me that they picked the one that's with the more submissive, nicer woman, which was Chris Pratt, to become... to kind of reveal his true colors as a controlling person throughout the movie. It was sort of nice to have my instincts validated by a romantic comedy in that way, because they so rarely are. But I saw Chris Pratt proposing, and I was like, this is a shitty proposal. You want nothing better in life for your bride than to just sit on the same shitty sofa in 10 years and eat the same shitty Chinese food? Are you serious? You don't want anything better out of life for the woman you're in love with? Okay. I figured some people might find that romantic and moved on. But no, the film actually doesn't want you to like him by the end. And I was actually hoping that Chris Pratt's male friends in the movie would call out his sexist behavior more. Mm-hmm. But instead, Anne Hathaway just took a very nice route of saying, like, we want different things in life, instead of, calling him out more aggressively for trying to force his fiancée back into this box of nice woman who doesn't cause any trouble and doesn't fuss.
Yeah, you're right. That was such a throwaway dialogue and didn't feel like it was actually speaking to the situation that was frustrating her. And it makes me wonder at her ultimate sort of hooking up with Liv's brother as her, I guess, one true guy, the guy who was supposed to be there for her all along. I mean, is the film telling us that that is right, or?
Well, I mean, it's hooking up with Liv's brother is just displaced homosexual attraction to the sister, obviously. But I do have questions about her hooking up with Liv's brother because they get married 1 year after Liv. Did they get married at the Plaza Hotel?
It's a really good question. I mean, did they get married that same day? Like, it must have been fast. Very fast.
Yeah, I mean, well, these are the women who thought 3 months was a reasonable time period to plan a wedding in New York City.
At the Plaza!
Yes, the Plaza.
But of course, I think that that's interesting because you kind of wonder, I mean, in the early parts of the film when we see the reason why the girls are so obsessed with the Plaza, that they had this like tea with their mothers and they were girls and they saw this bride and how beautiful she looked. It struck me that in that moment, what they were in love with was the bride. I mean, they were in love with how beautiful she was and how magnanimous and how important and how glamorous. And that was something that they sort of projected onto each other. So I think that's why we don't need to know what ended up happening with Emma's marriage to Liv's brother, is that wasn't the important wedding. The important wedding was the one that already happened, was this sort of like displaced wedding between Emma and Liv. Because the wedding that had to happen at the Plaza had to be the two of them and not one of them and then the other.
Oh, you're right. So Emma didn't feel the need for a wedding at the Plaza Hotel anymore because she'd already walked down the aisle with Liv.
Yes.
We've solved the movie.
we solved it. I do have one question about this that I've been wrestling with as we've talked about it, which is that this Sex and the City popularized this notion that your best girlfriend can be your soulmate, even if you don't necessarily have a sexual relationship with her. And I wonder how this movie toes that line between like homosexual, homoromantic, female friendship, and how do we square all of those things without being too, I don't know, broad or simple?
I feel like I'm not qualified to answer this extremely good question. Yeah, this is something that I was thinking about throughout the movie is, did either of them go too far? Like, if your best friend started doing this shit to you, would you be able to forgive them? You know, if they made you fat and they dyed your hair and they made your self-tanner turn you orange. I don't even remember the rest of the bullshit they did to each other. Like, would you forgive them? Would you forgive them if it was your girlfriend or your best friend?
That's such a good point. I don't think so. And I think that really does point to the film as a rom-com about a couple that is two women, because the rom-coms are always putting the central couple through all of these wacky hijinks that they're just supposed to like overcome and decide that they love each other anyway. But in truth, like in my experience, like friendships between women, like you would not forgive these things. It would fuck up your relationship. But in a romantic relationship, you could forgive it, I guess.
Emma got Liv fired from her job, which is...
Oh my God, I forgot that.
Yeah, she had a breakdown. It was actually legitimately sort of hard to watch.
Is the film on some level saying that this is just what female friendships are like? They just stand the test of time no matter what you do to each other because that's how strong female friendships are?
I mean, it's obviously trying to say that on the surface, but the rom-com genre, as you pointed out, is all about couples doing things to each other that aren't actually acceptable in real life. But because it's a movie, you've just got to accept that they're in love and that they'll end up together at the end. So the structure of the movie, I mean, the only reason you can call this movie a rom-com to begin with, a romantic comedy, is if the romance is between the two female leads.
Mm.
Otherwise, it actually doesn't fall into the rom-com genre generally. And I guess we shouldn't even be talking about this. We should be on a different podcast that's just called Female Friendship Killjoys pod.
But it is funny, you know, in putting this show together, we are getting a lot of suggestions from people, and a lot of them are what you might just call chick flicks that are about weddings. So I've been thinking about that too, about why chick flicks that are about weddings are lumped in as rom-coms. And maybe this film is trying to address that it's because they're often about the love between a woman and her friend or a woman and her own dreams. I don't know. What do you think?
That's strange. Maybe there isn't an outlet for women to express these kinds of stories that are just about how much they love other women and how much they love themselves, except in the context of a wedding. Maybe that's just not acceptable to say out loud otherwise. Chris Pratt was fond of pointing out in this movie that Emma was going crazy, she's going wild, she's acting nuts, just stopping just short of calling her a bridezilla. But really, it was like her bridezilla-ness that saved her in the end. Becoming a bridezilla allowed her to demand that her friends tell her that she's beautiful. Being a bridezilla is what caused her to see the first signs of Chris Pratt's worrying behavior and then call off the movie before it even began. So being a bridezilla is actually good. That's the moral of the story, I think.
What does this movie think about weddings? It's so weird. Like, it loves weddings and it hates weddings. Like, it's so interesting.
I think that's how most brides feel about weddings, though.
That's probably true. Brides out there, tell us in the comments.
Like, weddings are just such a fraught time for basically all women. Like, it's like this, well, women who are getting married,
Yes,
obviously.
yes.
Of which I do not count myself in that number. But it's this time where you have to be perfect. Your life has to be perfect. It's like a source of intense joy for you, but also a source of a great struggle for you. And I think that's just, it's like in Shakespeare, right? Like, you have to have a larger than life setting so you can put all of these deep emotions that we all feel out on a grander stage. And I guess for women, weddings are just our Shakespeare, our Civil Wars, or Julius Caesar's, or Macbeth's. It's weddings. That's where so many stories about female lives are told these days, through this kind of grand stage of getting married, which is depressing.
It's true, but I think that is a really succinct way to sum up what we can take away from this movie that kind of summarizes so much of what we've been talking about, right? Like, if stories about war are a way for understanding male-male bonding and male glory and male sort of beauty and strength and ferociousness and men at their best, then you're right. I think that weddings are the wars for women, in the sense that it shows woman-woman bonding, or it's a legible way for us to understand woman-woman bonding, woman's glory, women's beauty, women's strength. So Alice, as we come to the end of our time together here, we, on the show, every episode, try to think of antidotes for all that is bad about the movies that we are talking about. So now I ask you, what is your antidote for Bride Wars?
Oh, so I recently watched a movie that people will enjoy if you like watching strong women who know what they want out of life, but are insanely flawed and learn to confront their flaws at the very end. And it is the recent remake of Emma. It is out on streaming because all of the movie theaters are closed. And there is even a wedding at the end. So it covers all bases.
My antidote is also a movie. It is based on a true story. It's a 1994 psychological thriller from New Zealand called Heavenly Creatures. It stars a baby Kate Winslet and baby Melanie Linsky as two best gal friends who are gal pals, who are definitely just pals, who become obsessed with each other and then kill one of their mothers as a sort of love pact, a toxic love pact. And I think it's a really interesting and, as I said, true portrayal of the real intensity of women's friendships and how complex, nuanced they are, apart from weddings, courtship, and relationships to men.
Oh my God, is that what you consider an antidote?
Yes, I do.
Oh, that sounds grim.
It's very
grim. Okay, I'll have to watch it. Okay, here's an antidote. Pet the nearest dog.
I love that. That's an antidote not just for this movie, but for all of our lives right now.
For life. It doesn't have to be your dog. It could be a stranger's dog. It could be a friend's dog. It could be a dog that you've kidnapped off the street. Just pet that dog.
That's right, everyone. Remember, as you snuggle in your homes, pet that dog.
Pet that dog.
But try and stay 6 feet away from people.
Yes, but not dogs.
Thank you, Alice, for being on the show and talking about this film. I know that it's close to your heart as a film about weddings and wars.
Yes, my 2 favorite things.
Thank you for listening to the RomCom Killjoys podcast. If you liked this episode, make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at RomCom Killjoys. And if you'd like to support us further, you can become a patron at patreon.com/romcomkilljoys to gain access to exclusive bonus content. Our theme song is Lady Slut Hitchhike Love by the band A Giant Dog. And the song you're listening to now is a cover of one of my favorites, Baby Love,
by Colin Langanis. Remember, Killjoys, don't let anyone kill your joy. Not a rom-com, not me, not anyone. See you next time.